as we were campaigning for a greener built environment, going from one association to another, going from one university to another, is a matter of having the energy to actually do it. But as I was reading the email inviting me, I find it quite a tall order because as I was looking at the lineup, it's hard to be speaking right after the most intelligent people in the room had spoken. So as I was reviewing my slides, I have my usual script when I do my presentations. And as I was looking at my slides, I said, I heard all these people speak. And most of the things they speak about are the very same things that we would like to share to the industry. And I simply said to myself, maybe I need to change it a bit and give you a little sneak preview to much of the things that's happening as we are trying to learn much of the challenges in industry. So I will be sharing to you a few anecdotes, a few narratives. I had chosen to make my presentation quite a bit informal, just to give you an idea on what are the things that's happening as people are making much of the decisions for us in this industry. We've all heard of this. One of the most quoted when it comes to how we are to define sustainability. And whenever we see this quote, the definition of sustainability, do we really stop and look at the next generation? Do we look at our children? And I was wondering whether my lolo and my lola was actually thinking about how my generation will be living in this day and age. When we started the GBC, as I was asking about where most of the families were coming from, one of the founding members was a son of a miner, son of a logger. My granddad was in the military and then went into oil exploration. And I said, maybe that's why we are destined to meet, because we got to clean up much of the things done in the previous generations. And in 2009, I remember we were taking up our fellowship in Melbourne at the time. And one day when we woke up, our classmates were telling us, our condolences to you Filipinos. And we were wondering, why are they telling us condolences? It was Ondoy. And we were laughing at the time because, in Manila, if the flood is waist high, you should be fine. I mean, that's the way most Filipinos see it. But lo and behold, around the afternoon, we were getting calls already from Manila. It was only then we realized much of the impact of previous building activity is actually doing to us. It's good, my family at the time was at our weekend home. It's a few hundred kilometers above sea level, so they should be fine. But when I got back, we lost 3 cars. And I was quoting this and I was telling my dad, what we're experiencing today was because of the irresponsibility of your generation yesterday. Therefore, you owe me a car. That didn't fly, but my dad is now in acquisitions of land, and I was trying to explain to him, we have to communicate to people we work with in this industry that when we are looking at our investment, we have to look at green. And he was saying, this is the hardest part. Up to this day, I have to admit, it's really a challenge to convince my own dad, to go into green. But after Undoy, I think he softened a bit and he started inviting me over to some of his meetings, for us, to share the idea of how do we incorporate sustainability in our business model. This was discussed a while ago. At least we're number one at something. We're the least able to adapt. We're the most vulnerable. So does it sound good to be number one? Not at this case, no? Now, let's look at some of the trends. In 2001, we formed a very informal group, and we were trying to develop programs for the Masaya district for solid waste management. And people were saying, when we were trying to define green and we were trying to promote green, people were saying, it's just a trend. It's just one of the things that we're going to report. Now, there was even one time, one CEO approached me and told me, my board told me to talk to you, but beyond that, I don't know how we should be working together and why should I be listening to you? Because at the end of the day, that same board that told me to go and approach you and talk to you is the same board who's asking me, you have to be in the black. So it's really a challenge, if you are a key decision maker in the industry. And this is really the discussions. But the thing is, from a trend, sabi nila, uso lang yan. One day, it's not gonna be there anymore. No? For most of the people who's been in the industry for the longest time, they've seen trends, they've seen things come and go. This may be the hot thing today, they won't be buying this tomorrow. But then you're starting to realize that this trend is starting not to be called a trend, but really a driver. Much of the decision making of people in industry now is, yes, we would like to be green, but not because it's something that's good to have, but because it's something that we should be really involved in, something that we should understand, because it may mean that our unsustainable building practices may lead to us being unsustainable. More jurisdictions are adopting green more and more. We've seen in the past decade, especially here in the Philippines, we track everything that happens in the United States, especially in the policy development front. We've seen different jurisdictions from local, state, federal, that they're starting to incorporate green codes, green rating schemes as part of their regulations. And people are wondering whether that should be the way to go, whether this jurisdiction should develop their own scheme or should they adopt something that's already existing. Now, much of the trends that we see is most jurisdictions are adopting what's already out there, leveraging on the expertise of industry. And they realize that, yes, in government, with shrinking budgets, or the budget is not shrinking, but the responsibilities are growing, they need to always look at opportunities to partner with the private sector and leverage on their expertise to be more efficient in the governance front. Multinational enterprises, as they go around the world looking for investment opportunities, are almost always bringing with them their environmental mandates. Make it part of your strategy. There's a growing number of tools focused on existing buildings, not just buildings, but existing buildings. In the past, we've seen so much focus for what should we be doing for new buildings. But if you really look out there, you get to see only a few cranes, but much of the landscape are existing buildings. The thing is, we may be getting all these new buildings certified, but what are we doing to the existing building stock? Is it a convenient excuse to say, but that's a 1950 building, we can't do anything about it? There's a huge opportunity, for both the private and the public sector, for us to revisit, to look at these buildings and see how we can transition these spaces and make them green as part of a more holistic strategy in making our cities greener and develop more sustainably. And also, green building rating systems are being more country-specific. I remember in 2001, we were doing this waste management program here in Makati, and we got the attention of USAID, and we got support from different various programs, and they said, you better go on a study tour to the US to see the different trends, and maybe this can be a major contribution from us, and maybe you can come up with more or less the same programs in the Philippines. So team members went to the US, did the study tour, met people from the USGBC, different jurisdictions, different practitioners, and people were discussing LEED more and more. And at the time, in 2001, LEED was still something that you get to download for free. Unfortunately, today, you really need to spend for it, no? Pero noon, it's something that you just download, no? It's something that's being passed on. during the early days, we were hearing also so many challenges in actually convincing the private sector, even in the US, to go for green. Now, when we got back, we were trying to talk to some of the leaders in industry, some of the major policy makers. And when we tried to get an appointment, when we knock on their door, the problem is we can't even get through their secretaries. And if ever we get through their secretaries and we talk to a major policy maker, the question is whether they should look at poverty alleviation or green building. Food security, green building. I mean, if you look at these things, if you're to be fair, not to people serving in government, these are really very, very serious challenges that they are facing every day. But then again, I was starting out in development work at the time, and I didn't realize that much of the disconnect in thinking was very, very wrong, and we were delivering it the wrong way. It was only later we realized that there's so much connections that can be created on how your building can actually contribute to solutions to much of the problems in governance. And for people in the private sector, how green buildings can help make your companies run more efficiently and better profits. More on the trends. There's an increasing role of IT. In the past, when we started the GBC, much of the people we talked to were architects, engineers, developers, contractors, and people selling every imaginable product that may be used in a building. But lately, we're starting to see more and more software companies. We're starting to see more and more discussions on how to leverage on technology. We're starting to look at the value of the cloud. So before, we were thinking about how do we distribute Verde. The discussion was, how much is the cost per page to print Verde? Now, later on, they shifted to why not simply distribute Verde as a PDF and develop a business model wherein we give away Verde and try to earn on other things to support the cause instead of making money on the text. And then later we realized, do we come up with a team developing something for the iPhone, for Android, for print? Hopefully before the end of the year, we're going to start to experience the developers in Verde typing once and publishing elsewhere. So hopefully by the end of the year, we get to see Verde in the iPhone, in the Android for free as a web page, and something that you can easily print if ever you need one in the job site, something that's viewable on the iPad. Why is this important? We need to create a community of people who gets to read the text, to understand it, and also allow them to look at its flaws to enable them to complain and to criticize. Here's a typical cycle of what we're experiencing. People will say, Verde's defective, that's why we're not using it. And we're telling them, why don't you download the form, fill it up, give us the part that gives you problems, and comment on it. In standards development, unfortunately here in the Philippines, we never really bothered with standards development. I was looking at the history of standards development in this country. I realized the private sector wasn't really playing a key role for local development. Why? Because it's very convenient, because we inherited a system when we were under the Americans for about 40 years. In the past, if there's something that we need to guide our professionals, we go US. We read ASTM. We read ASHRAE. Isn't it? So that was always the case. In the late 70s, as a fluke, our government decided to be the standards body. So if you look at other countries, standards is developed by the private sector, laws by government. So you have two layers. Something that sits above the codes that's developed by government, and the other one was best practice codes developed by the private sector. But in the Philippines, it's just one entity who plays that role. It's government. And then who makes the assessment? Again, it's government. So if there's no standards, even if you are invited to participate, but if government suddenly decides, let's just go this way, you just end up following. So what happened was, in the evolution of standards development, this is what happened. Here's my take. This is just my opinion. In the late 70s, when government decided to create standards, they invited us. They convinced us to develop certain standards. When we did not agree, they promulgated it anyway. And when we did not follow, they did not have a mechanism to actually get it implemented. That's why we are operating within two frequencies in society. Now, you get to see a lot of buildings that are substandard, and you're quite wondering how they get done. Paano ba naitayo yan? But it wasn't passing standards. So, when we were developing Verde, it was then I realized that we're trying to do something that in the industry we've been failing at over and over again. That's why we see it as a challenge. That's why I'm actually sharing this to you. This is in order for you to understand that whenever you see something wrong with the standard that's developed for this country, stop complaining at with the wrong person. Stop barking at the wrong tree. You go to the council, you provide the comment, you are a service to society. And then what's going to happen is in the next version, hopefully we get to incorporate it. The problem is when the GBC invites industry to comment, nobody looks at the text. But when a client of yours starts deciding to go for Verde and you realize the text is defective, you want the change done today. The thing is with standards development, there's a cycling methodology. You have to allow for comments. So when we publish it for comments, according to the standards for standards development, you need what? 60 days. So if you need that change today, you have a very big problem in your hands. So we're starting to see a new set of professionals who's starting to become more cautious. And they are now starting to look at the risks associated with what they are promising their clients. In the past, what's happening is, in this area, architects and engineers before, disclosure, I'm an architect myself. What we realized at the time was, architects and engineers were promising the heavens to their clients. We will give you a platinum. We will give you a 5-star. Without really trying to understand first whether they can actually deliver that to a client. Now, during a project, it is when they realize, oops, we have a problem. This is something we don't understand. And then they complain. I guess what I'm trying to tell you is, we have to keep sharing our expertise and get something back. Because I always believe in society, it has its own physics. You throw something at society, you get it back. You throw something good, you get it back. Now, the lead rating system was a lot of learning for us in the industry. Unfortunately, what most people don't realize is it being a very good system, if something is wrong because maybe it's not working with local regulations, you really have a big problem. But with the local system, well, we're both GBCs, no? But this is what I'm trying to say. National GBCs were established to make sure that the approach for sustainability is more localized, but it is only as good as the engagement that we provide, no, with the council. So what we get is what we are planting, no? So ganun din yun yung bagyo. We kept building, happy days are over, and then it started raining, and then it started flooding. It was all because of previous work, no? Now, more on issues and challenges. This is quite a good one. No? Post hoc ergo propter hoc. No, after, therefore, because of it. Most of the discussions we are experiencing, no? I mean, when we are talking to people who's contributing in standards development, ang thinking niya is, it's because of a fact, therefore, it is a sum of that fact. No, masyadong maiksi. We don't look at the big picture, no, when it comes to decision making. My favorite example of this is my granddad got rich because this is the way he does business. My father got rich because this is the way he did business. Therefore, if I followed my granddad and my dad, therefore I will get rich. Unfortunately, if your granddad was a developer and your dad followed his business practices, unfortunately, much of those business practices is not applicable today. It's already obsolete. It may be because the leisure of developing before, you do not have it now. The pressures of investors before are different from the pressures from your investors today. But the thing is, this is how Filipino investors, businessmen, are actually thinking. No? We get to experience this in our discussions. So, if they say na the standards 40 years ago, it was like this. You know, Chris, you listen to me. I've been in industry for 40 years. You don't know what you're doing. Unfortunately, he was referring to a standard promulgated 40 years ago. And things has changed differently. So I guess the learning that has to happen, we must recognize in industry should be continuous. So hindi pwedeng kung ano naman nating practice, ganun pa din. Now, the prisoner's dilemma. Here's a mathematical concept that we get to see every day, no? I mean, if you look at the top 10 developers, they all agree, green building is the way to go. But if you look at the way they invest, and you ask them, so if you recognize that this is the way to go, how come you're not making your investment, your next investment, green? You know, Chris, kasi there's a competition. Yes, everybody benefits if we go green. Even suppliers benefit. We require more services. But we need to level the playing field. If he's not investing green, I wouldn't be investing green. I will price myself out of the market. But if everybody's pricing it the way it should be priced and everybody's doing green properly, then I'll give it a go. So everybody is waiting. No? That's why it's called the prisoner's dilemma. I don't know if you've heard this before, but this may be likened to two criminals, no, under interrogation. If one was asked, I'll give you 10 years if the other squeals and you don't. But if you squeal now, I'll give you 1 year. And then the other prisoner will be asked the same. So with that risk, if you do a quick math, it's easy to assume somebody will be going for a plea bargain. They'd go for 1 year, then get away with it, with the risk of somebody squealing and you getting 10 years. This is the same thing that's actually happening. This concept was being, as I was studying this before, I was looking at this in the context of treaties being crafted, no, at the conference of parties. How come there's always an impasse when it comes to the arrangement of treaties at the UN? And then later I realized this is the same phenomena that's happening in the building industry. That's why it's very important that the dialogue continues so that all the businessmen get to coordinate their efforts because it's all for everybody's benefit. Moral hazard. It doesn't affect me, why should I care? We get to see a lot of reasoning. You know, they're quite very honest, no, when they discuss this with us when it comes to the development of standards. They would say, you know, my problem is it's hard to convince my board to go for it knowing that I get to pass this on to the consumer. So even if I'm not efficient, I'm just passing it on to the consumer. It gets paid anyway. But if I invest now, I run the risk of not getting my investment if I make a bad decision. Now, that's why I think the more we learn, the more we exchange, the more we have these kinds of events, the more we see how our peers are practicing, I guess it's good for everybody so we become more responsible with the decisions we make. Split incentives. Up to this day, the landlord-tenant paradox is still at play. The landlord won't invest because it's the tenant who gets to reap the benefits of that investments. But we're starting to see more and more creative contracts being drafted that allows the landowner earn and share that benefit with the tenant, so it's a win-win situation. You've heard a lot of these stories, no, since this morning, and I hope we get to see more and more of this in the years to come. Now, this is a sad note, no? The job hopping CEO. Most of the first three, we get to see this in popular academic literature for real estate. But the last one, this is a personal experience that I'd like to share to you. Most CEOs, if they know that they will be moving on to their next job, maybe this year or next year, won't be making that sustainability investment that has a payback of 2 years or more. And why is that? Because if he promotes that decision making to his board and say, let's invest today, that's capex for him. So he will be quite in the red for a while. And then his problem is the one who gets a pat on the back for running an efficient company is the next guy. So go ask your CEO, do you plan to resign the next 2 to 3 years to go to the other company? If he says yes, if he is honest enough to share that, chances are he's not going to promote any decisions that involves payback when it comes to sustainability strategy. Well, we're starting to smell the excitement of the next elections. Again, we routinely go to Congress, to hearings in Senate. We get to hear this, but in private. I won't quote quotes, but most of them sometimes would be saying, let that be the next guy's problem, especially with the political challenges that is being faced today. But I'm telling you, even before the challenges that is quite exciting to listen to every morning, that we get to hear every day lately, this is something they're thinking about. I guess that it's a question of how do they manage the uncertainty that is associated with instituting change. No? So ang problema doon is how do you give them that certain level of comfort for them to really pursue that bill, to get that green building code out, to get that green building rating code out, and make them feel that it is something that is really good for the country. So our strategy at the council is to keep providing them with policy briefs to allow them to better understand how industry thinking in this end. Race to the bottom. I've been hearing the issues of LGUs, regulations of the different LGUs. Unfortunately, we still experience the race to the bottom mentality amongst city councils here in the Philippines. There are some who finds it to be in their best interest to not raise the standards but to lower the standards in order for them to retain or attract investment. No, especially here in Metro Manila, that's why you will see that sometimes the cities that you expect who would be going for it, a green building code, would not be that city, with the interest of making sure that they get to retain the businesses in their city. And the last issue is actually implementation. We were looking at the policy framework here in the country and we were comparing it with the rest of the region. I am glad to report to you that when it comes to the development of policies, we're number one, be it in the area of building regulations or environmental regulations. But don't ask me about implementation. Now, there's this ping-pong game that's happening. When you ask industry would be saying it's the government's fault. But if you ask government, they would be saying it's the industry's fault. So I guess is the more we understand what the real issues is about, the more we understand how we can actually get tangible benefits from doing the right thing, the better it is for us. So more research in this area is actually more ideal. Response in the private sector, certification, whether it's ISO, LEED, Verde, we always feel that standards-based certification is something that's good for us. But the thing is, the problem is in the area of professional regulations. If we have architects and engineers in the room, we know that the charters of our professions is actually the guarantee to our clients and nothing more. That's why it's hard to sell the idea of building commissioning, because even the professionals themselves, you will find it interesting that they don't want their work checked. But for businesses, it's very important that they recognize that yes, there's maybe somebody reputable giving you advice, but it's also good practice that you get to check on it, so that as you learn more, you get to be more decisive in succeeding investments, and as you learn more, the more efficient your company runs. Coordination through trade associations, but this is improving. We're starting to see before, architects and engineers, they don't see eye to eye. June, agree? Architects will always say the engineers are dumb, and the engineers will always say the architects are dumb. My granddad was an engineer. He said his daughter was dumb because his daughter is an architect, and then the daughter said, you know, Chris, we're always right, so we respect our elders. No, so ganon, no? Me being an architect, we've seen this happen over and over. But interestingly, in the past 3 years, we're starting to see more coordinated work amongst the engineers and the architecture organizations in this country, which I find very promising, because there's a certain level of diplomatic work that's happening among competing professionals that has been fighting for more than 50 years in this country. So I find that very promising. Consumer education, I mean, there's a lot of nonprofits now who is being very instrumental in providing this. And as a response for the moral hazard question, it's always good if we keep reminding the board that yes, it is their duty to earn money, no, to facilitate decision making in that area, but they also have a duty, no, to raise that standard of care, to ensure that what they do is also good for society. Public good, especially if you're a large corporation in some form, should be made part of your mandate. It's a moral mandate. Development of better contracts. Again, we've heard of the previous speaker talk about energy service contracts. This, as it is being developed here in industry, it gets to contribute more and more to managing the landlord-tenant paradox that I was talking about. For the public sector, we've heard of in this country, we've heard of the Iglesia vote, the left vote, the right vote. I hope we start hearing the green vote, no? I mean, if you look at other countries, no, environmentally conscious voters, no, are starting to demand green politicians. They're starting to look for people who would be thinking about the environment, and this is how they are voting. I guess when it comes to voter education, it should be part of the criteria, no? Pinag-iisipan natin so that the regulations that they make, which affects us in industry, becomes something that is more meaningful for us, sustainability-wise. International cooperation, harmonization of standards and agreements. To be fair, no, to those who had used the lead rating system, when they went to us and they were asking about the BERDE rating system, their concern was incompatibility, recognition of foreign investors. And their concern is, what's our guarantee that BERDE is going to work for us when we explain to our foreign investors that they would recognize it? Now, for others, it was actually the reverse. That's the concern. What's our guarantee that as we are doing our lead projects, it doesn't become obsolete because suddenly BERDE becomes the more dominant choice? The way we explain this is, yes, we acknowledge the work, no, of other organizations when it comes to certification. But when you go for certification, look for those that are standards-based. And at the end of the day, it all goes down to this being a brand issue. Another thing is whether these certification programs are actually responsive to your issues here, right here in this jurisdiction, in this industry. If that is the case, you go for it. Also, what is not known to many is it's not a question of lead or versus BERDE. these are done both by green building councils. It kind of it defeats the purpose, no? If you look at this as two competing systems, no? Nadagdagan pa ng green mark, ng BREEAM. What most people don't realize is when we have our meetings at the World Green Building Councils, it's just a question of brand. Most people are saying, but you're just copying one standard. The other standard just copied the other. The way we see it, if you ask the rating system developers, no, we're not copying. We are coordinating. This is to ensure that come 2015, ASEAN integration, when businessmen in the region, they start investing in another region, it may be a different brand that they're facing, but there's certainty with the decision they're making if this rating system or certification program is promulgated by a GBC. So for us, in the coming months, there is much rushed work in this area for the benefit of industry because it's very important that when we develop standards, this is in full coordination with the rest of ASEAN, of the region. And then capability building for public decision makers. Sabi nila, we were able to push for that green building ordinance. The city council promulgated it, the mayor signed it, hooray. What most people don't realize is the challenge has just begun because there has to be support that has been provided to the building officials. You know, we've seen, especially the other cities that went ahead, that the challenge is not in getting government to create regulations for green building. The challenge is how do you ensure that people in City Hall understands how to implement it properly, because we might end up making it more challenging for people, no, in our sector. So it's an issue of taking action. So my parting words is, we have to evaluate opportunities as they arise. Most people are saying, we're not going for green because there's no incentives. But you know, if you really think about it, with a good tax lawyer, with a good CPA by your side, and you look at what's out there, our government, the way we see it, has already provided so many incentives. But the challenge is, how do we navigate the incentives that's out there to make sure that this is applicable to our green building investments? So we have to look at these opportunities. We have to develop a strategy. As we develop our strategy, this may be before the decision to make that building, during the design of that building, during the build, and during the lease out of that building. There has to be a connected strategy from every phase. You know, it's hard if the designers are designing it green and those operating it is actually not using the features that makes it green. So sayang lang yung investment ni owner, sayang lang yung talent ni architect if we are not using these buildings properly. You know, we're starting to see now our buildings, as it is being handed over, to have a user manual. Gone are the days when buildings are handed over and then the owner is left with running a building without a clear idea how that works. No? So it's how we develop a strategy to make our investments greener. We have to understand our tenants. You know, the problem is, most of the time, what may be green for the landlord is not actually the same criteria of green for the tenant. No, it's understanding the aspirations of your tenant, making sure that when you are doing the build, it is actually aligned with what the market is demanding. Nasaan ba yung challenges nila in making their operations more sustainable? So as we create new building stock, we have to ensure that we understand our tenants well. Presence of incentives, again, finally, we just have to look for it. You may want to visit BOI, you might want to visit your banker, you'll be surprised. We now have a suite of sustainable energy financing. We have now new partners in industry who will be able to help, who may be able to help you take on that project with financial assistance or loans or incentives. Along with this presentation, I heard Richard will be sharing the presentation. It's a report of last year's Philippine Energy Efficiency Program. It is that time when the public and the private sector co-governed, no, energy efficiency in our industry. So I'm attaching in this presentation that report. When you download it, feel free to browse through it. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact us at the Philippine Green Building Council. So as my parting words, it's not always good times, but to make sure that the good times stay, we have to be more responsible and we be more analytic, no, when it comes to making those decisions to ensure a greener tomorrow. So with that, thank you very much.